Welcome to the Joyful Nourishment Podcast. This is a podcast about our relationship with food and eating, body image, eating disorder recovery, mental health, and more. I am your host, Lynn Thorstensen, a registered nutrition therapist and body image coach based in the west of Ireland. And I'm so glad that you're here. So we are at episode 10 of season 3. And I thought for this episode that we'd take some time to look back at what I have covered with my guests and in solo episodes. And I suppose what this whole experience of podcasting has been for my first year of podcasting. I can't remember exactly when I launched it last year for the first season, but I think it was the beginning of August. And at the time of recording this, we are now in the middle of August 2024. So I think it started, I don't know, I'll have to go back and check. But anyway, you can see exactly when the first episode was released. But I think it was around August time last year. And for that first season, I recorded 10, and I had recorded and edited and done all the work during the summer and then released them back to back weekly. But I realized from that experience that that was not going to be sustainable for me going forward. So from then, I moved then to about every other week for a new episode release. And if you are on my newsletter list, you know that in between, I also send a newsletter that also lives on my Substack platform. That so it's been helpful to keep this kind of cadence going for me, especially as somebody who's not very consistent. I'm quite proud that I've been able to keep this going for over a year with about 2 breaks in between. So I've published something once a week every week for over a year, and that's been also interesting in itself, I think, because as a one person show, you have to be many things. And for me, I really enjoyed moving towards focusing on my newsletter and creating this podcast rather than feeling like I have to churn out a lot of content on Instagram. And that was part of the whole process of moving into this space. I put Instagram on the back burner for, 6 months, I think. I dip in and out of it, but I haven't posted anything on my own content for quite a long time. And it's just because you can't do everything. I have somebody helping me to pin links from Pinterest onto my content. So again, there's other ways of, getting things seen. Because this is the thing, like as a self-employed practitioner in private practice, you have to constantly, think about your marketing and how you can reach people. But there's been so many other joys and learnings and takeaways from, starting a podcast. And I think that's what I wanted to explore with you all today. So this is the 30th episode of the Joyful Nourishment Podcast. And, that's not a huge amount in the great scheme of things. I know people have been podcasting for years and they are in their hundreds with their episodes. But I think still 30 episodes, there feels like there's a bit of stickiness in that, or a bit of stamina in that. It's the podcast, has a small listenership. The total download of episodes are inching closer to about 3,000 downloads, which, it's pretty cool. I'm not somebody who has a huge following or a huge email list. So I'm really grateful for the people who are tuning in every week or who find the podcast and go back and listen through, previous episodes. And I think this was also a thing when I was considering starting a podcast, even going back a couple of years ago. I've been thinking about podcast as a medium that I wanted to explore, to create content for a few years ago. But it wasn't until I moved to Substack last year as a newsletter platform, and again with my intention was to create content that has longer shelf life, because everything is so fast paced. And if you are on Instagram, there's some amazing stuff there. There's an awful lot of crap too that are not helpful, but there are some amazing people there creating amazing content. And I think I just felt that it was so fast paced, and that if you're creating longer writing or you're creating newsletters, there is, a benefit to that. And the reason I moved everything to Substack, and subsequently then Substack gave me the opportunity, because it's a very easy, like the platform works as a place where you can hold your podcast episodes, and then it gets pushed out to wherever you're listening to this on. It could be on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or some other podcast platform, or even YouTube now, where things are going out directly. But if you are subscribed to my newsletter, you will also get this in your inbox, and you can just click the button there and listen directly on your phone or on your browser. So it was just very easy. Like, it was just easy. You create the content, you upload it, and you had to do a few little bits. But, it was just kind of a nice way to get started, because I think like the tech bit and some moving pieces and costs and stuff had sort of been holding me back. And then I was like, oh, now I can do it. And I think the benefits as well was for those people who were already subscribing, there was an audience already there, even though it's a very small audience. And my intention for this whole project to start off with was really, I think, as with everything that we're creating, and I had this conversation with Nadia Felsh some episodes way back, where we were talking about content creation and social media. And, I'm a nutritionist, and my job and my desire is to support people in healing their relationship with food, eating, and their bodies. I didn't set out to be a content creator or a, marketer or an influencer or anything like that. It was never it's not why I'm making this stuff. It is part of my marketing, because again, people have to find you, and, working with people and supporting people is also how I pay for the basic things in my life. But the other side of that, and I think the benefits in thinking about creating content, is that, making it easy accessible and making stuff that is hopefully helpful for people, particularly as a starting point when maybe you're looking to move away from dieting. It's a way to learn stuff. Do I think that we can heal our relationship from food from only accessing, content like podcast episodes, reading books and stuff? And do you know what? Yeah, maybe we can, depending on where you're at. I would think, that's part of my own journey. It took much, much longer, I think, than if I had professional help. But that said, finding the right professional help and the cost of it wasn't really accessible at the time that I was smack bang in the middle of my own struggles with binge eating. So there is that too. And I think there's a lot of benefits to have these conversations with people and to putting stuff out there to show, as a countercultural movement and a countercultural act, or even a rebellious act, to show that, health and weight isn't the same thing, and that there are, other things that we can do. There are other paths than just dieting and trying to just get better at dieting, basically. So, that's part of what I want to do, like putting this work out there to show people that you have options. There are alternatives, because I think a lot of the time we don't know. And it's so easy when you're in the bubble, like I am now, and connected with peers and colleagues and reading the books and learning the stuff and talking about, non-diet approaches and weight inclusive care and the harms of dieting, that you forget that the world outside talks about dieting is huge, that there's so much, there's so much noise right across the board for every age group still. And it's much, much louder than for those of us who are kind of more firmly planted within the weight inclusive care and non-diet approach bubble. And I think the other thing that I wanted to do was also that I think there is something different with audio and podcasts that works different from, both written content and video. The benefits is like that, with podcasts, you can listen to things on the go. You can do other things and you can listen to it, and you get a sense of the person, I think, when you're listening to their voice. And you've also lots more space to talk about things, and it's more conversational. There can be more nuances. You can create more in long form. And again, that was also something that I wanted to do because I was getting really tired of like the fast pace of social media. And like, particularly when Instagram was pushing video, but not long form video like that you have on YouTube, where you'd have 20, 30 hours even of content. Whereas these like really short, silly clips where highly educated and skilled professionals were like, jumping and dancing just to get a message across to play with the algorithm. And I think I don't know, there was a part of me that was like, I'm not doing it. And I just feel like this whole thing was devaluing the skills and the value of the work people are actually offering by basically being performed to some sort of monkey in a cage. I don't know. It just didn't sit right with me. And again, I think particular with this work, there's a lot of nuances. And even in an hour conversation with a guest or a solo episode, you still, it's hard to get into the real nitty-gritty work that comes out as you're supporting somebody or working with somebody over weeks or months or even longer. And the layering and the depths of this work sometimes, that it takes. And on social media, it can be great for learning, but it can be very bite-sized. And the bite-sized then feels like, if I can't do that straight away, or if that's not working for me, then I feel like then I'm just a failure again. It's just confirming that I'm not good enough and I can't do this either. Whereas when you're working within a therapeutic relationship, there's much more toing and froing. And even for me as a practitioner, I learned that, certain things that may work for me may not work for that person. And if we put something in and we're trying and it's not working, it's not landing for that person the way, that you want it to, and it's not functioning, and we have to come up with something else. And that's just, I think, the difference and being in that dialogical, relational, therapeutic relationship, that there is really, like, you can't get that because that is between two people or even in a group. But anyways, so that was kind of it. Like, I was getting tired of social media in general and Instagram, and I just wanted more space to explore nuances. And of course, I love talking and I love connecting with people. So for me then personally, doing this podcast has been such a lovely way to reach out to some of my peers and colleagues that I already know, and to have these lovely, enriching conversations that then in turn may also help others. And I think that's the cool thing with podcasts, because it's almost like you get to be a fly on the wall in somebody's conversation, and people are often talking about things and it can be quite relaxed, and you forget that somebody else will be actually listening to this conversation. But again, there's so many things that can come out from those that, can be so valuable and helpful. And that is, I think, different than if you're writing. And again, I like writing. I think I could get better at it, but this is a different way. And then with video, I think it's great because, video is great. We get a sense of the person, you get to see them. And the funny thing is with video in particular, you kind of develop this parasocial relationship with the person you're watching, because you feel like you know them. But of course, the person who's recording is looking into a camera. They're not looking at you, but that's how we perceive it. But, again, it's a great sense of getting to know the person. For me, what I have found, and I've done a lot of videos, even though I haven't actually shared a lot of them. I have a whole backlog of videos for a project that I was involved in a couple of years ago that then never really got launched. And I may start sharing some of them with you all. Or, some of them where it's appropriate. But I feel with video, it has to be a little bit more scripted sometimes than when I do these solo episodes. And again, when you're recording video, you have to be more mindful with how you move your hands and how you come across and the lighting and the clothing. And recording audio for me feels a bit more relaxed. So I'm really enjoying that, and I'm hoping that, you're enjoying it too. So overall, I think this experience has, for me, meant that creating, content to share with others, that with the intention of it being helpful and to be of service, is that it's been quite joyful and fun, instead of feeling like, a big chore and something that you have to do, and that somehow you're this like content creating machine, which, we don't really want to be. So yeah, there's all of that. So in all, I think I hear from people that they're getting stuff from the conversations that I have. And that's just always lovely to have feedback, particularly obviously positive one. But it's just for me from a creative perspective, this has also been really fun. Actually, it's been very nourishing to do this, and I'm really hopeful that I get to have many more conversations with people as I continue on this podcasting journey. And what are the things that I have been learning so far over this past year or so? And one of the things, and this goes for any kind of content that I create or share online, I don't know, there's some kind of weird thing that I make something, I'm sitting at home on my couch or in my kitchen or wherever I'm creating the stuff, editing it, uploading it, and then I just let it go. And from that perspective, it's like I forget that there are people who are listening to this, or who are reading my essays, or who have tried my recipes or whatever that I created and shared online over the years. It's just like, I'm so surprised. I always feel like, oh, you listen to it. But it has been great too, since I launched a podcast with some of my newer clients, to be able to share some of the episodes that I've recorded or that I've recorded with guests that I think may be of benefit for them. And it's also really been fun to hear from some of my current clients and the people I'm currently working with about their thoughts on various episodes and various conversations and things that, made them think that a guest said, or that was really helpful, or somebody shared with me recently that one of my guests in that particular episode, their story really resonated with the person I'm working with. And just, I think as well, feeling less alone in this can be super helpful. And I suppose I also do all the editing myself. I know I say that at the end of in the outro, but what that really means is that I'm listening back to every episode, including the solo ones that I do. And what that has made me realize, because I don't know about you, but like most people feel incredibly cringe, or, find it really difficult to listen back to themselves and to hear their own voice, because, as you know, we sound different back to ourselves, like when we're recorded, than how our voice sounds to us because of, I suppose, the resonance inside of our head or something. So just, it can feel a bit jarring. But what I've noticed is like, God, I've been doing this kind of video content for almost 10 years. And when I was recording all these videos in 2020, 2021, I think, and I was editing all of those myself as well, I just got over it. To be honest, I just got over it. And it's almost like when I'm listening back now that it's kind of like a third person. It's like it's me, but it doesn't really feel like me. And I can be a bit more objective. Whereas when I first started sharing like some videos and stuff, I could only share like 3 seconds. And I felt awful. So I don't know. It's just, it's taken years to get to this space, but it really feels like that through this continuous exposure, it's just gotten so much better, like so much easier, I suppose I should say. Another learning that I've had over this past 3 season is that it's also not that it's not necessarily super easy to conduct a good interview. And sure, if it was easy, everybody would do it. And I mean, people who are trained journalists, they go to school to learn these things for years. So as a complete amateur, again, it takes, I think there's definitely more work that I could do to get better at this, and thinking about how do I, structure my questions, how do we make sure we stay on topic, but also then still keeping things like conversationals and making sure that you're getting the message across that you want, listeners like you to learn from or to take away and identify with, or whatever it is the focus of that particular topic of conversation is. And so when I started off last year, I started with people that I already knew or had some connection with. And I think this was really great. That was a very helpful game plan. And I think they just made things more relaxed for sure. And again, it was great because I had this opportunity to connect with these people that I know over the years, that I worked with or learned from or been mentored with or collaborated with. And it also made me realize that I actually know a lot of people from all across the globe in this space of eating disorder recovery. And that's just been so lovely. And I suppose for coming seasons, I kind of hope, so I'm putting this out there, that I can stretch myself and start reaching out to other people in the field that I don't personally already know, because I would really like to bring you great information through, creating these conversations so that, more people can find this place of having a peaceful relationship with food, eating in their bodies. And I think about, podcasts, and there's one of my absolute favorite ones that I like to listen to and that I've listened to over the years and learned a lot from is Chris Sandal's Real Health Radio. And I often recommend that to people. And he's great. He's been podcasting for a long time. He's good at doing interviews. Some of the sessions are really long, but he also does some solo ones with content. And it's kind of almost like creating this bank of resources for learning experience that I can share with people I'm supporting, but also for people to return to. And I think that was another thing when I started podcasting or recording, is that I just wanted to create content that has longer shelf life or longer longevity. That generally, I think you can still get something from particular podcasts that were recorded some time ago. So even if it's not fresh, when it's very sort of down to basic stuff, I think there's a lot of value for that. And that also means that somebody who's making the content and recording it and creating it or writing it, it has more value, like for the person creating it to put it out in the world than when you're constantly just churning out things because an algorithm is like not showing it to people, or, it's so fast paced. The other thing that I wanted us to do for this episode was to really look back at, what have been the most popular episodes so far. So out of the 29, and if you go and look back, you can see that before I launched the podcast, I also did a couple of kind of just voice notes, basically. That was me trying this feature out on Substack using audio, and it was just fun. They're much shorter, but there are also available in the library because of how the kind of tech stuff works. So they're there, but I don't count them into this, official podcast. But when I was looking back at the stats preparing for this, one of the, or actually I should say the most popular episode so far by a mile is the season 2 episode 9, which is the magic of giving yourself permission to eat all foods. And I just thought it was kind of interesting that like it has twice as much downloads as anything else. And, I suppose I wonder why that one has been so popular. Is it like because of the title? Is it because, it's something people are curious about? Because, there's always a restrictive element to, struggling with food, whether you're on the restrictive side only or more the sort of binge purge or binge eating sort of space. There's always restriction in there somewhere. And it's just been, I'm so curious. Like, it seems to be really popular. And I suppose because for me, it is one of the most, I don't know, the thing that's the closest to my heart to talk about. And because I think it was very transformative, that whole way of approaching things for me. And it's also something that I see that is very transformative for most people. Again, there's nuances to that approach and how we navigate through that coming from a restrictive background. But yeah, it's had over 220 downloads so far, which is huge for a small podcast like mine. And like I said, it's more than double any other episode. So that's kind of interesting. And the next one then that has been really popular too is season 3, episode 3, which is Let's Talk About Food Rules. And again, it sort of, aligns with the permission one. They kind of go hand in hand. And that's been pretty popular too. And I think, again, it's like, that one, and then a recent one I did, which was like, is it time to break up with the scales? Like, the 3 of them are kind of all tangenting on the same concept. Basically, is it time to let go of restriction? But, what comes up around that, and how do we navigate that space? Another one of my solo episodes that has had a lot of downloads so far too is from season 2, episode 3, How to Navigate the Holiday Season. And even though that one was recorded with Christmas in mind, I think much of the content applies to any other time of the year, really. And I wrote a blog post, I think back in around that same time, towards the December in 2023 or maybe January, I'm not sure, around, like, is dieting seasonal? Because we're now, at the time of recording this, in the middle of August. School, people are still in holiday mode, but, in another month or so, people would start returning from back to school, back to university, coming after holidays, and often, it's time to do another diet. So that, and the diet then often stretches from sort of end of September into Halloween. Then there's, Halloween is a holiday, and Thanksgiving if you're in the US. Lots of sweets, and then there's another batch of restriction moving into Christmas, and the cycle just goes on like that. But anyway, so that's another one that's been really popular. And then finally, out of the solo episode ones that also seems to be popular is the very first episode of season 1 of the podcast, and that's my own story. And I just wonder, is it because people are just curious about my backstory? And if you've listened to several episodes of the podcast so far, you know that many of my guests have their own stories of having had a challenging relationship with food and eating and body image. Some people have had disordered eating, some people have had diagnosed eating disorders. And I'm hoping that, bringing people to share, and there's a couple of people who've shared just their own story of struggles and their story of recovery. And I suppose my intention with that is to hope that by sharing stories of lived experiences, that it sort of reduces the stigma, and I think also makes people feel less alone, because there's so much shame around this. And even though we talk about it more, a lot of people don't talk about it with anybody that they know, or that, a loved one. And then sometimes if people are disclosing it to a professional, it's kind of brushed to the side. I'm like, well, you're fine, or worse, congratulated because they've lost a lot of weight, or told to diet harder when people are binge eating, or being sent to, off to a slimming club that isn't really going to be the answer. And people also carry a lot of shame, feeling like, well, there must be something wrong with me because I just can't get my shit together around food. And that's not true. There's not true. And somebody said to me very recently, she said, who's been dieting for a long time, and she said, I never realized that restriction could be a root of this. Yeah. And it's so common. And if it's not at the very root, it's all pretty much almost always accompanying whatever else might be underlying, simmering there too. So, this having a difficult time with your body or with your relationship with food, it can be such a lonely experience. And I'm hoping that also part of my intention with this is that in telling our stories out loud and to share it with other people, particularly when people are further along in their recovery journey and in a different space, and that it can both reduce stigma but also bring some hope, and to bring hope that recovery is very much possible. So those are the kind of top 5 of the solo episodes that I've done, which is pretty cool. And then when I was looking back at the stats for my guest episodes, so some of the most popular ones so far has been from season 2, the episode 5 that I did with Nadia Felsch, the impact of social media. That's been really popular, and the conversation went kind of, a few different directions, and Nadia is very knowledgeable and a really nice person and does some great work in the world. And I really, really enjoyed chatting with her. Then there was from season 1, episode 4 with Emma Murphy, who I did some work with in her professional training program. And we talked about understanding binge eating, and Emma has designed a program that is called Eating Freely, specifically for dealing with binge eating. And that was a great conversation too. Emma is not somebody who has her own lived experience with binge eating, but in that particular conversation, we also talked about, the personality type of somebody who tends to develop binge eating. And she very much fitted into that kind of type of person. So that's kind of where the overlap was. Again, a great one, I think, to listen to if you haven't already. From season 2, episode 2, the importance of family in eating disorder recovery with Deirdre Redden, another Irish person who I spoke with earlier this year. And Deirdre is very knowledgeable and does a lot of work with family members of loved ones who have eating disorders. And I think it's like that was another great conversation, and really showing how supporting the people around the person struggling can be very helpful, and also the toll that supporting a loved one can have on the people around them. So again, great one, and I think like for me, a great one to share with people like any younger clients that I have with their parents, because again, asking for support for yourself when you're supporting somebody else can be quite challenging. Another one from season 2 that was very popular was episode 7, Understanding Orthorexia with Lynn McGovern, another Irish psychotherapist who's done some research into orthorexia. And Lynn is great too, and I really enjoyed chatting with her. And we looked at, we talked about orthorexia, what it is, what it isn't, and kind of like distinguishing orthorexia from, healthy eating. But we also, the conversation also sort of tangent on atypical anorexia, which is people who don't meet the weight criteria for low BMI, but have all the other symptoms and behaviors of anorexia nervosa. Again, I think, it's something that people are interested in. I think orthorexia can fly kind of under the radar for a long time. it doesn't have an official diagnosis. And, you know, there's a lot of stuff that's questionable that has been normalized. And this is where it gets tricky, particularly with this. When does it tip over from healthy eating into something that's a bit more sinister? And then one of my personal favorites as well that has been quite popular so far, it's newer, and it's also from season 3, and it's in episode 4 that I did with Anna Strickland, who is under the brand name Heard in London. She's a photographer. She's somebody who lives in a fat, somewhat disabled body, and she talked about from self-objectification to self-care. And Anna is so cool, and I just loved speaking with her, and I think I would love to have her back for another episode in the future. She's a real cool person. She is quite radical, and I heard from a few people who listened to the episode that it challenged them, and I think one of those was when Anna said, she said, I had to imagine myself not just twice as big as I was, but maybe 5 times as big as I was, to ask myself, could I love myself then? And if not, why not? Which is really something to think about. Yeah, because that goes right to that internalized fat phobia, ableism. Yeah, it's a difficult one. So that particular episode is one of my personal favorites from the 29. I'm not counting today's one. But there is a couple of ones that stands out in particular from this season that we're just concluding. And apart from the conversation I had with Anna Strickland, Johnny Landell, who is a fitness coach based in the UK, who used to do a lot of CrossFit competitions and then and fat loss coaching, and has moved, towards working with people on intuitive eating and body acceptance in the fitness space. I also loved that conversation. In the conversation I had with Johnny, she really shared like his own story and backstory of his relationship with food and kind of where it started and how he got into fitness and how that environment really wasn't helpful and how it fueled his disordered eating and his skewed relationship with his body, but also like how he has kind of turned it around and how he's coaching others in this space. And I think in particular in the fitness space, it's so refreshing to hear these conversations. And I also loved being able to share this story, which I think in many ways actually tangents with stories that I hear in my clinical practice and that I hear around the place about, like it was very similar, but this was a story coming from a guy, and representation matters. And I think, not that I don't know if I have a lot of male listeners, but if you're listening to this and you have a young man or even a partner or somebody where, maybe they would be helpful to hear a male voice in the space of intuitive eating, non-diet, and weight-inclusive care. So I'm so grateful for Johnny that he said yes and that we had that conversation. And again, his content on his Instagram post is great. So yeah, loved that one. And then the third conversation that I had in this season 3 was with Michelle Tubman, who is an emergency physician in Canada, in Alberta in Canada. And she is also a woman living in a larger body herself, who did a lot of dieting, coached people on weight loss, and then kind of just didn't feel right anymore and could not really put the two together until she did. And then, really moved away from weight loss and towards accepting her own body, and also looking at, medicine and healthcare through weight inclusive lens. So again, I think that's a really powerful conversation. And the work that she does was just, it's great, and we need more of that. But I think because she's somebody in a larger body, has a lived experience, there's something genuine and different than if that message was coming from really somebody who doesn't have that experience, I think. And I think maybe why all of these 3 episodes and these 3 conversations are some of my absolute favorites is because I think their stories, their personal stories, and their work shows the depth of, this work. And when I say this work, I mean moving away from dieting towards weight inclusive care, and intuitive eating and attuned eating. Because they speak of the harms of dieting, and they also spoke about how, in different ways, I suppose, of how we can separate weight from health, and that divesting from dieting is, in and of itself, a radical act of self-care. So if you haven't listened to any of those episodes, I think you should, because I think they're great. And if you have already listened to them, again, feel free to share them with anyone that you think may benefit. There's a couple of episodes that I think deserves a little bit more love, because the world is full of content. And of course, we just keep adding more and more. And that means that things that are actually quite good can get buried. So it gets lost and it gets buried. And I wanted to take this opportunity to mention a couple of episodes that I think are well worth listening to if you haven't already. And I'm going to list them in the show notes and link to, so that'll be easy for you to just click on a link. You can come back to this particular episodes and you can just navigate from here if that's easy. But in season 2, episode 4, I spoke with Melanie Hargraves, who runs the very good our excellent Instagram account When Trauma is at the Table. And we spoke about trauma and what it is and what it kind of isn't, and big T's and small T's, and how that intersects with our relationship with food in our bodies. And Melanie is another really lovely person, and I really enjoyed the conversation I had with her. And I think that conversation really deserves to be listened to, and it doesn't seem to have had that many listeners so far. So that's one. A solo episode that I did back in season 1, episode 5, the many facets of hunger. Again, I'm curious why not that many people have listened to that one. I think I may flesh that out, that particular topic, a bit more in coming seasons. But again, it just kind of gives an overarching view to the many facets of hunger beyond just physical hunger, but our emotional hunger, heart hunger, what are we hungry for? Sometimes we're hungry for food, but sometimes we're also hungry for other things. So again, I think that's worth listening to if you haven't already. Another one from season 1, which is episode 8, that I did with psychologist Shauna Farrell, another great person, and she really spoke about, the path to body acceptance and her path to moving away from dieting. I think her story is very relatable for most people, and how coming to peace with, where your body lands when you stop dieting, and that's actually fine. And that by doing that, you can live a much fuller, richer life. And then one that is pretty new from season 3, which was episode 7 that I did with Vinci Choi, which is called Widening the Lens of Nutrition, where we talk about, her background in bariatric surgery, but also kind of nutrition in the cultural sense, and kind of moving away from just food as nutrients and into this sort of larger social context. And I know that one has had some good feedback too. So if you haven't listened to that, again, I think it's another one that needs to be highlighted. And again, I've been so blessed to have been speaking with so many wonderful, awesome colleagues for these episodes. And yeah, I'm very grateful for their willingness to say yes and to come on and have these conversations. And again, so what's coming up? Season 4. I'm going to draw this to a close. This turned out to be a much longer recap than what I had planned. But many of you might not know this, but how I tend to work this content is that I record my guests' episodes in batches. So I already have recorded all my guest episodes for the next season that is coming up starting in a couple of weeks. And how I then work is that I edit them as I go along, usually the week of when they're going to be released. So I've interviewed a couple of really interesting people for the next one. There is a personal story from a therapist. There's going to be a double episode by a guy who has a neuroscience, nutrition background, bit of his own lived experience. We'll be looking at neurodivergent, and there I got brain health. There was a lot, other kind of aspects of food and eating. I have a conversation with a peer support worker and his lived experience as being a gay man and in recovery and in a bigger body. And I think there's going to be some really nice conversations. I spoke with my friend and colleague Migret around mindful eating and diabetes, and conversation around the force of familiar, which was something I really learned from her. So I'm really looking forward to sharing all these for you, and I'm looking forward to planning on who I would like to have for season 5. So that's kind of how I work. But then for the solo episodes that are interspersed between the guest ones is I kind of just do the prep recording and editing often all in the week leading up to when I'm planning to release them. And, I wish I could be a little bit more ahead with these, but that's not really how the workflow seems to go. And again, like I mentioned earlier, you have to remember that I am a one-woman show or a one-woman band, and in my weekly workload is also, of course, included my work with the people I support, my clients. I write a newsletter, and I have to do other kinds of content creations or marketing offers, or have meetings with people and organizations that I'm involved in, and maybe doing some study or reading or have supervision. There's lots of stuff that's always happening. And as one of my friends recently pointed out, as somebody who's self-employed, you're kind of responsible for doing the work to create the paid work that you do. And there is a part of me, let's just be honest, I'm going to put it out here, that there's a part of me who just wish sometimes that I could just sit in my clinic, and my clients would just arrive and I wouldn't have to do any of the marketing stuff. But I'm trying to think about marketing as a creative pursuit, and that really helps. But, it can be a lot, and that's why, I realized I could not produce one podcast episode a week. And I also like to mix things up, even for myself, to do some writing, to do some recording, looking at past content that I can refresh, and other ways of connecting with people so that people who need support can find me. But I don't like working all the time, and I have gotten way better as I got older, and I worked a lot of this in my relationship with work and rest, and I try to create space for other things, for my hobbies and for people and my partner and my dogs and friends and being out in nature, so that I can show up refreshed when I am there with the people I serve and support. And it just feels really important that I do that so that I'm not burning myself out, and that I can be the best practitioner that is possible and support my clients in the best way possible. But, like I said, I have some really interesting guest episodes lined up for next season, and I hope you stick around for that. And if you have some topics that you would like me to cover in solo episodes, I would love for you to let me know. Send me an email or comment on Substack under this post or somewhere else that I'd see it, or send me a DM on Instagram. that, I would love for you to talk about this, or I'm struggling with that. Could you speak more about that? That would be great, because I love creating content that is really useful and that you want, which I think most content creators want to too. But I also, of course, have ideas and thoughts about things that may in general be helpful, because there are things that I see show up in my work with people. And my hope for the future, I think as somebody who's been creating content on the internet for over a decade, never had a huge following on any particular platform. What I would love with the podcast, though, is to keep it going for the foreseeable future. And of course, you never know what life might bring you. So right now, though, the kind of release patterns of one episode every other week, roughly, seems to work. So I'm trying to stick to that. And I just love the creativity of audio and having the space to explore things more in depth than you can do on short Instagram posts. And again, I think this audio is an easy accessible format for most people, and because you can access it on the go. And I think that just makes in a world where things are just stupidly busy, podcasts are great. We can do two things at the same time. So where you're watching a video, you maybe have to watch it, or if you're reading, and if you're a slow reader, then, it takes more time. I suppose I'm not sure if I'm expecting this podcast to grow into like thousands and thousands of followers or listeners, but I think about it that if even one episode or conversation that I have with somebody can help somebody think differently about their relationship with food, eating in their bodies, or support that person in being more kind and compassionate towards themselves, then I really feel that the work and the effort that goes into making this podcast is worth it. And like I said earlier, I also hope that, this podcast can be sort of a hub for accessible resources for people who might be struggling to, access other types of support, due to financial barriers or location barriers or something else, or it's not the right time, or that even it can be there to plant seeds for people, like that there are alternatives to dieting, that there is ways of taking care of ourselves. It doesn't mean, we have to restrict things, or that we have to be punitive or punishing, but actually that we can take care of ourselves in ways with food, with movement, with rest, with kindness and care. That's the lens that if we are coming through, or that's the muscle that we're sort of strengthening. And of course, this is also a way of marketing myself. This is a way of putting my voice out there, putting my work out there. And that, I'm hoping that there are people who listen to the podcast that are looking for somebody who needs some support, and that they then take the step to book in for an initial chat to see if I happen to be the right person for you, whether that is working one-to-one, or as I am planning to launch a small group program in the coming months, again, to support people and make it affordable and accessible. But, or maybe you're listening and you don't need support, but you know somebody else who might need support, or looking for somebody to support them on their journey to find peace with food and with their body. But this was way longer than I had anticipated. This is a bit of a long recap. I'm going to put links to all the different episodes that I mentioned in the show notes, so that you can easily access and go back and check out the ones that you maybe haven't listened to already. Or if you want to share some with somebody else, then please feel free to do that. And again, as always, thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate that. Take care. Thanks for listening. The Joyful Nourishment Podcast is produced with no financial backing, and your support means a lot to keep this project going. If this episode has been helpful in any way, please consider liking, subscribing, or leaving a 5-star review on whatever platform you listen to podcasts on. This helps the podcast to be found by others. And of course, you can also forward this episode to a friend whom you think may benefit. Find out more about what I offer on straightforwardnutrition.com, and if you're interested in working with me, please use the link in the show notes to book in for a free initial 30-minute session. And finally, please come and join the Joyful Nourishment community over on Substack, unless you're there already, by subscribing to my newsletter using the link below.